It seems like the worst thing in the world for an ongoing narrative to abandon the constants it itself gives us, and instead establish something new to replace it. But that's what a retcon is, and that's exactly what the MCU and every other franchise does all the time. Occasionally, it's a clear backpedal from the writers or producers, either too unimaginative or cowardly to stick to what they'd made. Such as Kang. I don't know what's actually going to happen with him, but I'm preparing myself for a demoralizing retcon. But every now and then, something previously unknown or simply unconfirmed has been retconned into existence, and not only doesn't ruin everything that came before, but it recontextualizes the characters and their actions in a way that makes the story better. Welcome to Sandwich Reviews. I'm the talking sentient sandwich, your nihilistic optimist, and today I want to list off my 6 favorite retcons in the MCU. And all of these are obvious, I'm not blowing your mind with anything on this list, but I'm not going to go over anything too incredibly glaring or something that's only half confirmed. Like this kid being Peter Parker, Kevin Feige might have confirmed that, but it was never any screenwriter's intention to reestablish or recontextualize a previously known thing into something else. The criteria for how I'll be looking at these. So let's dive right into number 6. The Tesseract and Loki's scepter being the Space and Mind Stone. Less so the second one, because that was more of a shoehorn, but centering a lot of the narratives in Phase 1 around the Tesseract, and then making that a central MacGuffin in that series' epic finale, just wow. Instead of introducing the concept of an Infinity Stone in the Avengers movies that are all directly affected by the Infinity Gauntlet, like Marvel just as easily could have done, they wisely decided to organically develop 5 out of the 6 stones throughout phases 1 through 3 before audiences ever really knew where it was building to, allowing for seamless integration from one corner of the cosmos to the other, just because we, the audience, knew every character introduced would be brought together by these magical gems, empowering that collection of movies to rightfully claim the name, the Infinity Saga. And thanks to the first Captain America, the post-credit scene of Thor, and the first Avengers movie, we all knew that the Infinity Stones were bouncing around. And there were guesses as to where they could have been, but no one could account for all of them. I mean, after the sludge that was the reality, can I even call it a stone? The rest of the Infinity Gems floating around could have been anything. Fan theories were everywhere with the stones, such as how many people had correctly assumed that because the Tesseract was able to open portals, it was the Space Stone, and how Loki's scepter could change someone's will, something a little beyond his own magical ability, so it must have been the Mind or Soul Stone, which both happened to be the case. Although it wasn't until that was admittedly over-explained in Age of Ultron that we really got answers. Honestly, Marvel could have and should have shown more restraint and withheld that information about the stones for even longer. The nerds always knew where Marvel was headed, but no normie knew who this random purple dude was at the time. Him and the Infinity Stones were thrown in with the hope that the other nerds in the audience would recognize them and attach to that overarching narrative. There might have been a plan from the start for it all to culminate in a massive Avengers movie, but the best case scenario was Marvel shooting from the hip with a hope and a dream. Thankfully, it worked out. And along those lines is number 5, the fake Infinity Gauntlet. A blink and you'll miss it Easter egg thrown in for no other reason than it was a rare cosmic item to be added in with the rest. Was it sensible for Odin to have stuff like the Eye of Agamotto and the Infinity Gauntlet in his treasure room? Not entirely. But they were fun inclusions to see back in 2011. Unlike the stones popping up with what always could have been some sort of endgame in mind, the gauntlet was added to Odin's treasure vault simply for the fun of it. And that movie's director, Kenneth Branagh, probably didn't have anything to do with it. I could have done more research to confirm this, but I guarantee it was just a random set designer or a visual effects artist throwing it in for just the hell of it. Because at that time, it's easy to understand how there's no way Marvel could ever actually adapt to the Infinity Gauntlet saga, right? But because the MCU is a continuous series of interconnected movies, that seemingly harmless inclusion turned out to be a massive contradiction. There were headcanon fan explanations that Odin had a mock created during his emo past, and a theory that I especially love that he stopped particularly because he would have had to sacrifice Hela for the Soul Stone. But nothing in the writing ever outright confirmed any of that. Hela says that the gauntlet is a fake, but that also flies in the face of the idea that it's a genuine mold created with Odin's intention of wielding it. Yet whether or not it's a fake or a prototype, Odin had Peter Dinklage whip up. Hela even addressing it was wild to see in Ragnarok. And another wild thing to see is number 4, Zhu Wenwu, or the Mandarin. Going years without any hope of adaptation, fans of the somewhat obscure Iron Man villain were finally given news in the early days of the third movie's production. And that news only got better as time went on, with Ben Kingsley's performance being highlighted in a teaser trailer I, to this day, still remember giving me chills. Sure, Kingsley may not have been the right nationality, but his ethnicity was vague enough to make it work. I mean, Marvel clearly should have cast someone authentically accurate for the role, something they would later rectify, but that didn't stop them from making their version of the Mandarin even worse. Twisting that movie's narrative to reveal that the menacing terrorist we were seeing, commanding all that respect, was just a ruse set up by Guy Pearce, a white businessman. Very original. And I can't credit the makers of the one-shot All Hail the King to fixing that mistake, because there's no way they had an actual plan for bringing the Mandarin back, yet they at least laid the groundwork for Shang-Chi. After seeing the 10 rings pop up here and there, and especially after Shang-Chi's movie was announced as Shang-Chi and the 10 Rings, and that Tony Leung would be playing the titular character's father, speculation was at an all-time high, rightfully replacing Shang-Chi's original father in the comics, who I'll just say would never fly nowadays. Both Shang-Chi and the Mandarin were being brought into the MCU properly, and a lot of the runtime of that movie was devoted to fleshing out who Zhu Wenwu is and why he hadn't been as prolific, being almost non-existent until we were 25 movies in, yet that made sense because he was mourning his wife, who he had retired for. And the only thing he was affecting after that was Ta Lo, the mystical village way out in an interdimensional plane. But now, retcon number 3, Lila being one of Rocket's known associates in Guardians 1. And this is yet another blink and you'll miss it moment, but when Rocket and the rest of the Guardians are being processed by the Nova Corps in holographic text, along with the extra note that he has a tendency to bite, he is established as having 2 known associates, Groot and Lila. Now this could be easily explained as the Nova Corps overhearing Rocket drunkenly talking about Lila and not knowing the full story of her being dead. But we know that's not the case, because first off, I doubt Rocket would ever bring her up, even in the most blackout of drunken states. And secondly, it makes so much more sense for it to just be a small otter-sized Easter egg thrown in that no one gave a second thought to. That is, until almost a decade later when James Gunn actually wanted to use Lila. In fact, Gunn himself outright said that it was a contradiction before Volume 3 came out. I'm sure to get ahead of the actually crowd, but it was still welcoming for a creator to just admit a mistake. Would it have been better for the continuity to hold from the beginning of the Guardians trilogy to the end? 100%. Yet even Gunn can't plan that far ahead. He came up with a good idea for Volume 3 and followed through despite the problems that might arise, and I can respect that. Besides, the end result happened to be one of the best trilogies ever, and one of the rare ones where the third isn't trash. In fact, the third might be the best. Though I say that, but it really just depends on the day, because each is incredible. But instead of discussing why each of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies are just as entertaining as they are thematically rich, I'll move on to another retcon in the Guardians movies, which is number 2, Stan Lee being an associate of the Watchers. Recontextualizing every Stan Lee cameo and making it sensible within that universe why the same person would keep on popping up around influential people was something I thought couldn't ever have been possible. Mainly because an explanation for why Stan Lee kept on popping up was never necessary. Him, Jack Kirby, and Steve Ditko were the Marvel guys. Thankfully, those other two have gotten their due recognition as of late, but because Stan Lee was by far the most well-known, he was bestowed with the immortalizing fame of appearing in every Marvel movie. Yet bringing in Stan Lee for the holy grail of appearances in Guardians 2 is quite possibly the most intelligent thing James Gunn has ever done. Something that would make for the best retcon in the MCU, if not for the one next on the list. But before diving into that, I want to talk a little bit more about Stan Lee being what is basically a spy for the Watchers, because those Watchers have slowly become a big aspect of the MCU. Not as impactful as I would like, but seeing Uatu break out of What If and be seen in other animated Marvel shows always gets me hyped. And I guarantee Uatu will make at least a small cameo appearance in Doomsday and Secret Wars. But even without any of that, seeing the bald baby-headed gods themselves and all of their live-action glory in the post-credits of Guardians 2 had me flabbergasted. It was such an obscure pull that increasingly made more sense the more you thought about it. But it's not the best retcon in the MCU. That title goes to, number 1, the entire 8th episode of WandaVision. And this isn't just my favorite recontextualization of a previously known storyline in the MCU. The entirety of this episode might just be my favorite retcon in anything ever. I still remember sitting down to watch it for the first time and immediately being compelled by the behind-the-scenes mastery of the writing, shaping that movie counterpart of Wanda into something much more comic accurate, filling in the gaps. Not just that, it made her powers make sense. Before then, it was so muddled with what she was capable of. Does she have telekinesis? Yes? But she can also create illusions in your mind. And I think that was just a mixture of her powers being loosely defined with her introduction and only further being confused with each subsequent Russo brothers appearance. It's depicted in Endgame that she was one of the most powerful Avengers, aside from Doctor Strange, Thor, Captain Marvel, and Iron Man, who all put up a fight in their own right. Yet Wanda was the only one who had Thanos dead to rights, with him needing to fire on his own men to get out of the bind she had him in. But it's explained in episode 8 that she originally casted probability hexes, and her power just exponentially grew from there. Which is extra cool, because her comic mutation is the power of changing probability. How does that and super speed get passed down from Magneto and Natalia Maximoff to their children? Who knows? Mutant powers will never make sense. And the writing in episode 8 also takes the rest of Scarlet Witch's comics origins and further morphs it into something not just functional, but emotional as well. Having her witchy powers be somewhat developed by A, Wanda experimenting and testing out what she's capable of, and B, being trained by Agatha. I mean, Agatha's comic counterpart is everywhere, dipping her, sometimes grubby, sometimes nicer fingers, into as many superhero worlds as she can for no other reason that I can tell other than that she just likes being around powerful individuals and influencing them. Being the godmother to Franklin Richards and full-on mentoring the Scarlet Witch for years. Not that the MCU version of Wanda gets that much tutelage from Agatha, only really learning some necessary but misconceiving life lessons about trust and the fundamentals of magic, both of which she takes and runs with. The episode also has the line, "What is grief, if not love persevering?" which catapults it into the stratosphere for me, but divorced from that, it all just works so well. And before wrapping up, if you're wondering why my voice sounds different than usual, well, April Fools! Did I distort my
voice?
Or am I one of the rare nerds who actually has a girlfriend and was just able to ask her to record? You tell me. But those are my 6 favorite MCU retcons. If you enjoyed this video, check out the 5 superhero cliches that need to end, and leave a like or drop a comment if you want more. And as always, subscribe for weekly video essays and reviews, and enjoy a delicious sandwich.